Well, good morning. My name is Connie Williams. I've been trying to understand the issues surrounding Arizona's water for several years now. Maybe you, like me, have heard the happy talk about how Arizona's water management system is world class and that the cuts to our Colorado River allocation are expected and manageable. What I found as I looked for information about this is there's a lot more to the story. And the rest of the story is what we're going to be exploring this morning. So if you'll just give me a minute here to get my slideshow set up. We're going to talk about Arizona's water challenges. And the way to start with Arizona's water challenges is to look quickly at Arizona's water sources. This lovely little graph put out by ADWR, the Arizona Department of Water Resources, tells us that 40% of the water we use in Arizona comes from the ground. Important to remember that groundwater has been stored over millennia. It slowly percolates in from surface water. When we use it, the expectation is that most of the water that we're using from the ground cannot be replaced. We're mining it. About the same amount comes from the Colorado River. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. Surprising amount comes from surface water. There's a kind of a shocking amount of surface water, especially around in the Phoenix area. A little bit, 2% comes from effluent or wastewater. That's probably a good thing. And while we're here, let's just talk about the source of the Colorado River. Colorado River Basin states include the Four Corners states, a little bit of Wyoming, Nevada, and California. Upper Basin states or the mountain states, a little bit from Arizona and New Mexico. This is where most of the water in the Colorado River is coming from. Most of the use ends up going to these lower basin states, Arizona, Nevada, and California. Now, our allocation from the Colorado River is 2.8 million acre feet. Oh yeah, they spelled acre wrong on that beautiful graph all the way up there. But 2.8 million acre feet, we'll talk in a minute about how that is problematic. And about half of that allocation, almost 1.4 million acre feet, goes to the Central Arizona project that was for 2021. Now, there are some problems, as I said, with that allocation. I highly recommend this if you're interested. There was Water the Colorado River. This was a College of Science lecture series in 2021. Part 3 of 5 was hosted by Connie Woodhouse. Dr. Woodhouse is a professor of geography and is a researcher in the tree ring lab. The tree rings reconstructions have got us back to the mid 700s at Lee's Ferry. Now, Lee's Ferry is just below the Glen Canyon Dam. You can see that it's pretty erratic. Tree rings can tell us a lot about the precipitation in the area, and you can see that it goes from good years to bad years, sometimes just from one year to the next. Now, the brown bars below are actually periods of drought when you've got a bad year more than 1 year in a row. Now, we're going to focus on one little section right down here. This was early 1900s. For about 20-25 years, the Bureau of Reclamation conducted their first ever study of how much water was actually coming down the Colorado River at Lee's Ferry. And what did they discover was that we had a lot of water coming down the Colorado River. But as you can see from this graph, this was an unusually wet period. Murphy's Law, right? So the river is over allocated based on this rosy understanding of how much water was actually coming down. Another thing to look at on this graph is this period right here of exceptional drought. You can see that even though drought is a factor in the Colorado River Basin, this period in the late 1200s was a bad one. And we know from other records that the Pueblo cultures could not survive. They actually ended up having to leave the area. We know that we are equaling that level of drought now. In fact, they're calling it a mega drought. Since 2000, the upper Colorado River has been at some level of drought every single year. You can see this brick red color is exceptional drought. And sure enough, June 2021, the map released by the U.S. Drought Monitor shows that the Colorado River Basin states are in a world of hurt, with a lot of the space in exceptional drought. Now, we had a good rain last year. Summer monsoons brought us good rain. So there's a little bit of positive then that we were able to get rid of this exceptional drought. But I want to call your attention to the fact that even though the severity of it's been reduced, the area of it has significantly expanded in the United States. We shouldn't be too surprised by any of this. In 2013, a paper was published, Assessment of Climate Change in the Southwestern United States. This was for the National Climate Assessment. And their findings included these: if we continue to emit carbon, we're talking carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels, we're talking methane, warming will continue with longer and hotter heat waves in the summer. It'll still be cold in the winter time, but maybe not as frequent, but we could still have a Texas here. Late season snowpack continue to decrease. This is a problem for communities that depend on that, especially in the latter part of the summer. And here we are. Droughts will become hotter, more severe, more frequent, resulting in water deficits in excess of those during the last 110 years. Well, we can push it back a little further than that now. So this was 2013. Another paper that came out, Lamont Doherty, Earth Observatory, this was in 2020. They described what we're going through right now as a mega drought, as bad or worse than anything from even known prehistory is in progress. And there's the fingerprint of climate change is all over it. Well, let's just take a look at what we're seeing on the ground. Lake Powell, which is the upper Colorado River Basin storage area, on February 3rd was at about 26% full. This was despite the fact that large amounts of water have been released from a number of upstream reservoirs. Now, partly the reason they're doing that is because this is also a hydroelectric plant, and there is a level below which the water cannot go before the hydroelectric plant is damaged. Now, this is the last 5 years of elevation of Lake Powell. You can see that 2022 is well below any of those. It is cause for concern. Storage for the lower basin states is Lake Mead. It was at 34% at the end of January. Here's the last 2 years, last 3 years actually. This is 2022 compared to the 2 most recent years. We are currently, as of at least February 8th, at 1,067 feet. So when we talk about droughts, there are differences between the drought that the Pueblo cultures experienced in the late 1200s and the drought we're experiencing. Because of climate change, the drought we're experiencing is much warmer. That dries out the soil. Dry soil makes it hard for crops to grow. It stresses trees. It increases the fire hazard. And it also means that as the snow or the rain hits the surface, it's more likely to be absorbed than it is to run off. This is a big impact. This warm drought has a big impact on soil moisture. Now, this graph is from a model. This shows what the expectation is by the end of this century. And you can see that that dark brown color, pretty severe across, especially the Colorado River Basin states and Mexico and Central America, where a lot of food comes from, is exceptional. But you can also see that a lot of the rest of the country is experiencing, or the expectation is that drought will be a major factor. And this kind of goes along with that January drought map, what we look at. Well, we know that the Colorado River is reached critical point. The CAP cuts were instituted this last year. And so let's just talk a little bit about the mechanism for that. So we are at a tier 1 shortage. Here's the DCP, stands for Drought Contingency Plan. This was ratified by all the Colorado River Basin states in 2019, and they basically said that when we reach 1075 elevation in Lake Mead, there will be cuts. Particularly the Central Arizona Project, which gets a lot of this water. Now, every 25 feet at 1050, there are more cuts. That's tier 2, 1025, tier 3, and one little extra one at 1045. Here's how this works. So Nevada will get cut, but you can see they don't take that much, and so their cuts are really minor. California, cuts don't come in until that tier 2B, but Arizona at tier 1 begins to take some pretty major cuts, and that may not be the whole end of the story. We'll come back to that in a minute. Important to understand when we're looking at those cuts that Central Arizona water it's divided into different pools. 36% of that water goes to municipal and industrial, 28 to tribal, and 17 is our contributions to Lake Mead. These do not get cut until the last possible moment. They are not a part of any of the cuts we're seeing now. Municipal, if you live in Tucson or Phoenix, you do not need to worry about having your Central Arizona Water Project cut. Where the cuts are going to come from are these other two buckets. This other excess, 100% of that is cut in this first round of cuts. And the other big one is agriculture. This in particular hurts the farmers in Pinal County. Most of the cuts, 65% of their whole expectation of water gets cut with this first round of cuts. Paper came out a year ago. This is from the Center for Colorado River Studies. This is the Utah State University. They suggest that the Colorado River Basin states, including Arizona, may have to have cuts more severe than they actually ever agreed to. In fact, they suggest that by up to 40% more by the 2050s as a result of this long-term drought. And such a cut would amount to twice as much as the 3 lower basin states agreed to absorb. Remember back to that map with those orange bars, double the size of those bars. Okay, so we can also see Tony Davis at the Arizona Daily Star has done a lot of reporting about water issues in Arizona, and he noted that for states that also get Colorado River water, say CAP is keeping too much for Arizona. So you can see that paper, that 2021 paper, may have stumbled on something, but what the heck, we signed a compact. They can fuss all they want, but we signed this agreement, right? Well, not so fast. It turns out the guidelines signed in 2019 for this drought contingency plan have to be revised by 2026. We could, in fact, if the drought continues, which we expect it to, have those cuts. So this is the part of Arizona's initial water challenges. Our CAP allocation was over allocated to begin with. We're in the throes of a long, hot drought. Other states are saying they want more of the water that we currently get. And of course, climate change underlies and makes urgent everything else we're going to talk about. Yeah, we've got more to talk about. It's important, though, that we understand Arizona does have some areas of the state that are wonderfully managed. In 1980, a water law was established that created active management areas with the goal to achieve safe yield. Now they're talking about then no more coming out of the ground than we're putting back into groundwater. By 2025, spoiler alert, we're not going to make that. But the active management areas include the big metropolitan areas of Phoenix and Tucson. Prescott is in there, Pinell, Casa Grande, but it's also got a lot of farms here. And there are a few other little spots on that. Oh, and Santa Cruz County, where I live, is an active management area. And then there are a few other little spots called irrigation non-expansion areas that are wrapped up in this. Now, Bruce Babbitt, just that becomes important later on, was the governor during this period of creating a good law. The way they were going to achieve safe yield was to slow groundwater use. Arizona has been growing in population for a long time. And people need houses. So they began, one of the features of the law was to require developers to prove that they had at least 100 years water supply for their new development. Lakes Mead and Lake Powell were commissioned to store the unused water. We began to reuse water, reclaim water. Palo Verde nuclear reactor is now cooled by wastewater. Block rate pricing for water. The first block is really inexpensive compared to the rest of the water you use. Rainwater harvesting does double whammy. It collects the rainwater that otherwise would run off and allows it to recharge the groundwater. And it also helps to prevent so much surface drainage that requires a lot of expensive infrastructure. That was a good thing. Pay homeowners to rip out lawns, incentives for water efficient appliances and irrigation. Big piece was they had to settle tribal nations' water claims, and it worked. I mean, Arizona's water management success, you can see here that our use, particularly between 70 and 80, holy smokes, it was going through the roof. You can see our population has continued to grow since 1957. But when you look at our water use, it has gone back. Now they're pricing it in dollars. I don't exactly know how to, but here's million acre feet or people. So million acre feet, 1957 and 2015, pretty much equivalent. That's quite awesome. That's an awesome feat. Before we leave this wonderful self-congratulatory slide, though, I want to point out one thing. This is from ADWR, Arizona Department of Water Resources, and they refer to this as Arizona's water management success. I have seen this repeatedly with ADWR material. They are really talking about the active management areas. When they say Arizona, they've conflated the entire state with the active management areas. Just keep that in mind as you see that. And this becomes important here because here was Bruce Babbitt talking, the governor when that wonderful law was passed, and he's saying that Arizona's water system for suburban growth is headed toward a train wreck. What? Arizona will struggle to find enough water for suburban growth. Groundwater levels are falling. What the heck? And most worrisome, they're talking about Quail Creek and Green Valley and even had a map on the website for the article. So something is going on here that hits us pretty close to home. And when we start digging, we find that in 1993, 13 years after that wonderful water law was passed, another law was passed that weakened it significantly. It's called the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. We'll talk about what that means. I'm going to refer to it as KGARD, the acronym. And so what this does is it says you can pump all the groundwater you want for new subdivisions if you have somebody somewhere else that can recharge that renewable water someplace else. So here we have a Sahuarita subdivision. They don't have access to Central Arizona Project water, any other kind of renewable water source to replace the water they're taking out of the ground. So they are able to go much further north, get Central Arizona project water that doesn't come this far south and recharge it in basins way up here. That is in a nutshell. Now we're going to see the certificates of assured water throughout this whole discussion. Just want to introduce it here. So here's this little map of the Central Arizona Project Canal. It goes to Pima Mine Road. Here's shows the town of Green Valley and the town of Sahuarita. You can see what the issue is. However, there's actually some good news with that too. It's very expensive to pipe water from the Pima Mine Road down closer to where it's being used in Green Valley and Sahuarita, but the Community Water Company of Green Valley collaborated with Rosemont Mine for finances to be able to do that. What they're doing, they have got a pipeline now from Pima Mine Road to bring it much closer to where the groundwater is actually being pumped. And the plan is to use it for recharge basins. The second pipe here is FICO, that's the pecan orchards. Now, in order to pay for it, they joined forces with Freeport Mining Company. Their FICO, of course, will use it, their allotment for irrigation and recharge, and Freeport is doing recharge. So that is, that's definitely a big help in this area. Just worth noting that Rosemont got approval to store CAP water in basins. Those are recharge basins, but the city objected to letting them do it. So we're kind of feeling like at this point, Sahuarita Quail Creek used groundwater being recharged by elsewhere, but as close as they can get by CAP water. These recharge basins are good for wildlife. So maybe it's not such a big deal here in Green Valley. Oh, yeah, and so we keep looking, but unfortunately, that's only part of the story. So this is a paper from ASU put out in the fall of 2019 by the Kyle Center for Water Policy at the Morrison Institute. Title of the paper is alarming: the elusive concept of that assured water supply, and specifically the role of K-GARD and replenishment. Remember, the R stands for replenishment. Findings of this paper, number one was that enrollment in K-GARD developments went far beyond whatever they expected. It's a little hard. There were some shenanigans when the developers passed that law. I don't know. Anyway, enrollment radically outpaced CAP water supplies. Now, we shouldn't have been too surprised by that finding, and I'm surprised that they're saying that they didn't expect it. Remember this assessment of climate change that we talked about earlier. Another finding they had is that our population in the Southwest is going to double between 2000 and 2050, which is going to add increased pressure on our water resources. Well, how are we doing with that? Are we still growing like we were earlier? Census data for 2021 puts us at the fourth fastest growing state, with Utah and Montana both tied. So maybe that makes us the third. So yes, the Southwest states are continuing to grow. Another set of findings is getting those supplies for replenishment is not going to be easy here on out. For one thing, the excess supplies, we already know those are gone with CAP, but we also know that the entities that had rights to CAP water that weren't using them all, that were selling them to these K-GARD developments for replenishment, they're using all their water supplies. We got a hot drought going on right now. We need more water. New renewable supplies, if you don't have CAP, where else are you going to get something to recharge your basins with? And of course, now we've got cuts to CAP. A couple other findings: pumping, quality of groundwater is not the same all the way down. The deeper you get, often the more mineralized it is. Some of those minerals are not so good for us to drink a lot of. And of course, the basic disconnect between pumping into one aquifer while you take it out of another is a problem, or pumping it further downstream in the aquifer, which is what's happening in Green Valley. Anyway, the K-Guard can't turn anyone away. It's depleting our groundwater at even greater rates. And we're going to talk about this one. K-Guard homeowners pay an open tab to get that water. They describe it as a potential financial catastrophe. One example they've given is that Phoenix assessment rate's gone from $154 per acre foot to $727 per acre foot. So that's a shade of things to come. But then we see this kind of alarming newspaper article. This was in the New York Times. Wall Street eyes billions in the Colorado River. What they want to do is bring in or amplify futures markets and millisecond trading to precipitously, that means very steeply, raise the price of water. Now, they know that because of drought, this is something that they can get the money for. A couple other things failing: infrastructure, government restrictions. And what they want to do is their focus on raising those price of water goes to the cities. They can't get farmers to pay really expensive water because the farmers can't get their money back for it. But in the cities, people must have access to water. Now, like this, pay farmers not to farm, that's maybe not a bad idea, but it's chilling. So good news suddenly doesn't look so good, that recharged water may end up becoming extraordinarily expensive. So we've got threatened CAP allocation. We've got threats to our groundwater supplies because of population growth and weak laws. And then we've got opportunists moving into the state focused on water. Now, when I first started to do this, I was looking at this AMA-INA map going, well, I know that's the big metropolitan areas, but that's sure not a very big part of the state. I wonder, where are the other wells in Arizona? So I just did a search for it and found this registry of wells and was a little bit shocked at how many wells there actually are that aren't covered by these active management areas. And then as I started digging a little deeper into what's happening across Arizona, I want to focus on three areas: La Paz, Mojave, and Cochise County. So here we are, La Paz County. La Paz County looks like this, unless you're Al-Marai, largest dairy farm in Saudi Arabia, which bought 10,000 acres of farmland in Vicksburg. They're using groundwater to make it look like this. I recommend this nice little YouTube video. Now, they're growing alfalfa, which is a water intensive crop pretty much year round, and shipping it directly to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia used to grow all their own stuff. They were kind of trying to be self-sufficient for a while, and then they realized their water tables were dropping alarmingly fast. So they said, why don't you go someplace else to grow this stuff and just ship it back here? What could possibly go wrong, right? Just a quick note, one of the things that when you pump these big industrial agriculture, they can go in and put in expensive deep wells. As the water table drops from pumping, what we see is that people who had existing wells that were adequate could not compete. A lot of the wells in La Paz County and the other places we're looking at are now going dry. This is a concern, as is another problem. As you pump out of these aquifers, with the water no longer there, in some areas, the geology is such that the ground kind of collapses once the water's gone, doesn't hold it up anymore. It's called subsidence. You get these big cracks in the ground where one side just slumps down. There's a big area in La Paz County, alarmingly, sort of under the Central Arizona Project Canal, that is really prone to this. Once this subsidence happens, that aquifer collapses and can no longer receive, it can no longer recharge with groundwater the way it used to. And alarmingly, if you look up in the Arizona Department of Water Resources, you see a big section like that here. This is Helmet Peak Road and the old Nogales Highway. Here's Pima Mine Road. There's a big area that is prone to subsidence right here. Well, large parts of Arizona, not managed by the AMA, groundwater is governed by the doctrine of reasonable use. But if you don't set limits to reasonable use, everybody's in there just helping themselves. I like this quote from Todd Reed, Business for Water Stewardship. We'll talk about him in the last slide, or at least that company or organization. Arizona is one of the only places in the Southwest where rural groundwater is difficult to manage because the state doesn't offer or enable tools to manage that resource. We will see that over and over again. So we were in La Paz County, going to shift up to Mojave County, northwest part of the state. This was New York Times Magazine. They called it the Water Wars. Here we are, lax regulations, industrial agriculture, dry wells for current residents. Another about the same thing states lax regulation, and they've added this piece. The companies largely operate in secret and most refuse to disclose what they plan to do or the amount of water that they're using. And that is a problem. There is no way that Arizona will ever know how much water is actually being pumped out of the ground until that changes. Just quickly with Mojave County, kind of interesting to see how all this happened because they haven't always been agricultural. But in 2002, a big real estate developer buys 100,000 acres, can't really develop it for housing after 2008 meltdown, economic meltdown. So he changes to large scale alfalfa farming, and Stockton Hill Farms, a UAE, United Arab Emirates based conglomerate, comes in and buys a bunch of it. They are the #1 exporter of feed and forage products to Asia and the Middle East. Sound familiar? California nut growers have moved in, California's more stringent water laws, and then this one's just cute. East Coast hedge fund investors have purchased land in the area, this article said, for agricultural purposes. We know different, right? They don't intend to farm, they intend to charge for that water, and all those dry well people are going to have to pay for it. So Mojave County is arguably the reddest county in the state, and conservatives tend to not want to see the governments regulating. They want to take care of it themselves. But even so, it was so serious. Mojave County leaders have asked the state to help safeguard their declining groundwater, but the state said, look, the law is the law. We can't do anything about it right now because we can't ask the well owners how much they're pumping, and we can't plan or help you plan based on what they're might be taking out in the future, because it is our law actually forbids us from doing that. And you can't limit this to say it's an agriculture non-expansion area, because if the well was already there, the state has no way to do anything about it. So that's Mojave County. Now we're down in southeastern part. This is Wilcox Basin. This was from a Channel 4 Tucson news, and they had just some nice graphics here, but it's a little bit out of date. This says dry wells since 2008. I understand the number is up to 100 now from another article, but a lot of wells are growing dry here. We are seeing huge usage compared to how much is being recharged into the aquifer. So this, you can imagine, this is not going to take very long before they've got a problem. And we've got the same thing going on here that we've seen in the other counties. Now, this one isn't from overseas. This is a Minnesota corporation, Riverview. They're a dairy. They purchased a bunch of land in 2015 and drilled nearly 80 new wells that are 1,000 feet deep. 3 of them are close to 2,400 feet deep. They plan to be the last man standing. Article says attracted here by freewheeling political climate, talk about nut growers from California and other states. In Arizona, no regulations exist as to how much water farmers can pump. Estimates put the number of dried up wells at around 100, and here we see the land subsidence. They're already damaging their aquifers. This concrete slab was poured at surface when the wellhead was put in. It's now several feet above ground. So we keep saying that this is all legal. Sharon Megdal, director of Water Resources Research Center at the U of A, says, if you start metering things, there's some people that don't want to see water regulated. And her advice is, instead of advocating for state law to change, more people focus instead on what they can control, their own consumption. I hope that hits you the way that hits me, but let's take a look at it. Maybe she's right. Okay, so in Tucson, actually, there might be some justification for that. This is single family and multifamily. That's just about 75% of where Tucson's water is going. So you can see that conservation might make a difference here. But when we go down and look at what's going on, this was from a Bureau of Reclamation water resource management plan for specifically the Green Valley Sahuarita area. We're looking at demand and supply. This is the whole municipal thing. No amount of you taking shorter showers is going to matter much to the water use, because mining and agriculture take 2/3 of it. Golf courses, now there is something you could probably do to use reclaimed water on golf courses. So that could be a good thing. But when we look at where that water is coming from, the supply, Central Arizona Project water is 1/4 of the water supply, and renewable groundwater is just a little slice of it here. When you look at the rest of it, treated effluent, impaired water, they're talking about maybe conservation and water management. Maybe they can get the mines and ag to do something. And this is not even identified yet. Currently, of course, it's made up of non-renewable groundwater. So there's a problem that conservation is not going to solve in most of those rural areas of Arizona. Another factor going on here. Now, I grew up in Arizona. In Arizona, all school kids learn that the 5C, or at least used to, the 5 C's of the Arizona economy are citrus, cattle, cotton, climate, and copper. Copper meaning all the mining. And in order to understand copper, a lot of Arizona is actually public land. And there was a law passed in 1872 that governed the extraction of minerals on public land. Now, important to remember, 1872 happened to be the same year that the combustion engine was invented. So when this law was passed, legislators were thinking a prospector with a pick and a burro, right? They weren't thinking today's big mechanized experiences. Okay, so far, $100 billion of minerals have been removed from public lands under this 1872 mining law, which does not require that any fee be given back to the government to the US for these minerals. And we have gotten $0 of royalties for them. And these mineral contracts are being increasingly, our mineral holdings are being increasingly bought up by other people from other corporations from other countries. We are currently facing in Santa Cruz County in the Patagonia Mountains, an Australian company who have come into the area, bought the patent, and now they've started their mining project, and they have announced that they are going to do dewatering. Now, what dewatering means is that in Santa Cruz County, we've got a pretty healthy water table under the Patagonia Mountains. That's a problem for the mining company because they need to get the water gone before they can take the minerals out. So what their plan is, the dewatering means they're going to pump groundwater, 1.6 billion gallons per year for the next 4 years, just pump it out of the ground so they can access the minerals. That damages my watershed. And quite frankly, I'm upstream in the same watershed that you are. So this dewatering is going to affect us all, 6.4 billion gallons over 4 years. What happens when you pump groundwater and reduce the water table, besides wells going dry, is that healthy groundwater support rivers and nearby habitat. If you've had a walk along the Anza Trail, especially down here in Santa Cruz County, along where the river is effluent dominated, but it's still perennial, you see a real healthy diversity of plants in that riparian area. You see surface water. We have a strong and thriving ecotourism industry in Santa Cruz County. I know you do too, in Pima County. As water levels decline, that healthy diversity of plants begins to give way to invasive species with deeper roots. That, of course, weakens the habitat for birds and other wildlife. Eventually you lose surface water, you lose diversity completely. It all becomes dominated by salt cedar. And you pretty much lose the birds and the wildlife, except for a few that can survive under those conditions. It is an economic as well as a kind of emotional hardship there. Okay, so our Sky Islands, these mountains around southern Arizona, are part of the Madrean Highlands of Mexico and designated a key biodiversity region globally. Animals cross, especially the big ones or the birds cross from one to another. And this San Pedro is one of the few perennial reaches left in this area. It is an absolutely critical migratory flyway for migrating birds. But, oh, I forgot to say, so we are going to look at a couple of big housing developments going in at Sierra Vista, them's I think already in, and Benson, that are threatening the groundwater of the San Pedro. So we have already lost the fight to prevent that big 7,000 home development in Sierra Vista area. Despite the fact that they couldn't prove a 100-year water supply, Arizona decided to go with them. And the push to allow this has been managed by Bowers and Griffin, Rusty Bowers and Gail Griffin. Now, for the last number of years, they have been the chairman of the committee that governs water resources in both the House and the Senate. If Gail is currently in the House and chairman of that one, Rusty is in the Senate, and he has nominated somebody to take over for him because I think he's also the speaker for the Senate. We're talking Arizona here. Gail Griffin is, she lives in the Sierra Vista area. Her job is real estate broker. Between Bowers and Griffin, they're the ones that push to allow the county to opt out of the 100-year water supply requirements, saying the local community knows how best to handle the water. Now, this is the San Pedro River, and we know what will happen to it is the water is being pumped. Up at the upper end of it, we have the same thing going on. Vigneto, this was 4 times the size of that housing development. Vigneto means vineyard in Italian. They're advertising that it's going to look like Tuscany, but Tuscany gets 35 inches of rainfall compared to Benson's 14 per year. So to go from this to this is going to require a lot of groundwater. And remember the San Pedro River, biodiversity hotspot, migratory flyway. 90 mammal species, including the jaguar and the coatimundi, are threatened if this river goes dry because of excess pumping. Another paper here that just came out a year ago. This is another one from the Kyle Center for Water Policy, and they're talking about that same yield. Remember, the assurance of safe yield. And they said our focus needs to turn to what is essential our groundwater and our increasingly fragile aquifers. Remember, we said they could be damaged. They said conservation is necessary, but it's not the whole picture. Too many users are allowed to pump all they want, and they don't even have to report how much they pump. They're referred to land subsidence, water quality degradation, aquifer compaction as big issues, and they are kind of they say legislation since 1980. We know that 1993 water law is a big problem. There may be another law that I haven't found yet. So we're adding this: lax, out-of-date water laws outside the AMAs invite exploitation, hurt existing residents and the environment. So we still have some choices. I like this little climate graphic because it kind of helps us simplify things. Resilience has to do with people thriving, coping, adapting. That's not really our issue here. This is with the water challenges. This is more about adaptation. How can we live with the impacts resulting from climate change? And how can we slow climate change, which is what so much of this is coming from. Well, so obviously we have to strengthen Arizona's water laws and at minimum enforce that 100-year assured water supply. But from that last paper, it sounds like we need to do more than that. 50% of CO2 emissions reduction by 2030, absolutely critical. That's the easy stuff. Another half again by 2040. That leaves us 2040 to 2050, the really hard stuff. I understand you can't make steel with solar energy. So there's some technological challenges, but that gives us enough time to sort that out. We'll figure it out, but that's what we need to advocate for. And before I finish, I just want to end here with a little bit of Arizona legislator stuff that I discovered slowly over the course of 2021. At the beginning of the legislative session in 2021, I looked at the water bills, and I highlighted some that I really liked and some that I really didn't. And I kind of followed them off and on through the legislative process and looked at what happened by the end. Now, remember Gail Griffin? She was a sponsor of a lot of the ones that I just really didn't like. We're not going to go into detail on those, but she is a very effective legislator. And remember, she's chair of the committee that brings these to the floor, so she can choose not to bring bills to the floor. But this one was signed by the governor in May. This one was signed by the governor in February. This one transmitted to the Secretary of State, which is what needed to happen to it, in April. This was signed by the governor in March. 4 out of 4. She's got her bill signed, sealed, and delivered. Now, these were some that I like. Victoria Steele, I think, is running for Kirkpatrick's seat, your representative to the U.S. House. I really like this one. Information that must be reported on all wells across Arizona, including the quantity of water that they take out and how much water is used during the calendar year. That never got out. It never was brought to a vote. There's irrigation non-expansion areas. Otondo's done some good water bills. She said we should be allowed to consider reasonable projected rates of withdrawal. We should be able to look at their plans and have some input on that. That was never brought to the floor for a vote. This, another Otondo one, extends the adequate water supply requirements statewide, never voted on. I like this D'Alessandro watershed health, kind of a holistic way of looking at watersheds, never was brought to the floor for a vote. So it's like, no wonder we've got such bad water law. We've got somebody in the legislature that is actually preventing us from getting better water law. So one other thing I did here just recently was I went to the Department of Arizona Water Resources, and I thought, what are they doing about these outside the AMA? They've got funny graphs that seem like they don't even know it exists, but Here it is, non-AMA groundwater. Okay, they're paying attention. And here it is, June 19, 2019. They recommend that the council form a groundwater committee. This is to look at groundwater issues. They didn't do it before 2019, but better late than never. Outside active management areas. And look who they chose as their co-chair, Gail Griffin. Talk about the fox and the hen house. Holy smokes. She's joined by Jamie Kelly, General Counsel, Mohave County Water Authority. So that is all fairly dismal, and I don't want to leave you with fairly dismal. I want to leave you with a little positive. So this was a study done by Audubon on the economic impact of Arizona's rivers, lakes, and streams. Water-based outdoor recreation ranks above mining and golf in terms of total economic output to the state. That flies in the face of conventional wisdom. 114,000 jobs, the GDP, household income, tax revenues, all a big boost. So we have an economic incentive to do what we can, as well as just liking wildlife. Like this one, in the face of what is going on, vested interests, if we work alone, sign a few petitions, it's not going to help. My biggest advice is to join a group that already exists. Give them some of your time, give them some of your money. Don't just sign up and say you've done it, actually work towards them. Okay, so we said I would talk about this Business for Water Stewardship again. They are part of the Water Coalition for Arizona. Now, a lot of these groups have to do a lot of legal work. That's why they need your money. But this Water Coalition for Arizona has got some heavy hitters. Environmental Defense Fund, this Business for Water Stewardship, Audubon, Western Resource Advocates, and American Rivers. Highly recommend them. Sierra Club always does a good job of going through the bills and helping us understand them and helping us know a little better the ramifications so we know which ones to support. And the two groups that are working to hold mining companies to the highest standards, Patagonia Area Resource Alliance and Save the Scenic Santa Ritas. I hope you help out with both of them. Thank you very much for your attention. Feel free to share this.